Hello, my name is Nick LeBron, and the title of my book is Prison Pipeline, A Legacy Rewritten. And just a little bit about my story and, try to give a synopsis. It is around the prison and what it meant in my community as an expectation and almost as a rite of passage, for Latinos in Hartford. Yeah, so in regards to this idea of prison as a rite of passage, uh, very early on, prison and the prison industrial complex was a part of our lives, where my father, my grandfather, cousins, uncles were all involved with the prison system in some aspect. And when you think about the system, it isn't just about going to prison per se. There is court fees, bond, bail, bondsmen. There is the visitation of folks in prison. There is court dates and appearing for support for someone who's going through these processes. There's also the end, where there's the release of folks who get out of prison, and parole and probation and requirements. And so it ended up being a very big part of my life, particularly since my father was in and out of prison, and a lot of my family members. So the status of my father's situation was always very relevant, because it was dependent on how much time I could and would be able to see him. So, throughout my growing up, and, understanding that all the male role models in all the male influences in my life their influences were actually like, don't be this way because you'll end up like them in prison. So they were like kind of the anti-role model, or what not to be. And so as a result, I kind of, moved in a certain way where, I tried to avoid making critical mistakes or big mistakes, because the reminder was, listen, if you keep on this pathway, you're going to end up in prison like such and such. And so, that was a constant theme, particularly being a male and seeing all these things around me. But the seminal moment for me, and when I really decided that, I was tired of it, is my mashed potato story that I tell all the people, all my readers of my book. And the mashed potato story went like this. We were at a family function, and at this family function, mashed potatoes was on the menu. And I love mashed potatoes, still love mashed potatoes to this day. But a friend of the family thought it was important to let me know that I was going to inevitably hate mashed potatoes after I got out of prison. And so for me at that moment, there were two things there. And I say this completely tongue in cheek. I love mashed potatoes, right? So no one's going to talk bad about mashed potatoes. But more seriously was the fact that he mentioned it as an afterthought after I get out of prison. So I immediately pushed back to him. I said, listen, I don't plan on going to prison. And he said, okay, we'll see. Kind of shrugged it off as a matter of fact, that inevitably this was going to be a part of my journey. And so those were like the kind of things that were happening throughout my lifetime. Sure. So I think there was one pivotal moment that changed the course. But I do want to say that I was part of that stream, right, where we're heading to the direction of potential incarceration. The first thing is that I'm very proud. I'm a very proud father of 3 adult children now who are professionals in their own right. But we started off, my wife and I, as teenage parents. And so as a result of that, I was independent very early on. And the importance of raising my family was on me very early at 16 years old. By the time I was 19, I had 3 children. And so I tried to, I worked. And so, but at the time, minimum wage was $4.27 an hour. And so that was not enough to sustain a family. So I began on a pathway of trying to make up that by selling marijuana. And at the time, it was illegal. Some would say that I had tremendous foresight now that marijuana is legal, but nonetheless, that it was illegal at the time. And so I was supplementing my income, being able to do this. And I end up being arrested and facing incarceration. And even with that, it took some time in that I had to go to, because it was my first criminal case, I didn't really take it that seriously because I felt like eventually it would be dismissed because it was just marijuana, I think, but there was points where I was violating the conditions of the program and the requirements of the court system. And there was, and the pivotal moment was when the judge, Judge Gold at the time, if you're from Hartford and had any kind of involvement with the criminal system, everyone knows who Judge Gold is. He is a very tough judge. He looked at me, he said, Mr. LeBron, if you violate one more time, you will be doing 5 years in prison. And that was the pivotal moment where for the love of my children, I did not want to be an absent father, but B, I also myself didn't want to go to prison, really, and it's okay saying that. I feel confident enough saying that. I did not, I was fearful of going to prison. And as they say in our community, I wasn't built for that. And so that's where and it wasn't overnight, but that's when I began to make changes wholeheartedly in my life and my lifestyle. So then it's now that, talk about my life being a professional. I think, first of all, I was a social worker and worked with with a lot of families in our community. But what I was most proud of in that first stage was being a social worker, helping families avoid DCF or getting them out of the system per se, right? So they could keep their kids in home. Very proud of that work. I work with a lot of single dads all over the state. That social work experience actually brought me all over the state. I've done in-home visits in Litchfield County, the Quiet Corner, and other cities, New Britain, New Haven, Bridgeport. And so I was able to see Connecticut's landscape in a real deep way, but also, speaking to folks directly. Then I became a family therapist, and I did that for 3 years. And that was very rewarding work, as that I worked with young juvenile probation office and providing therapy and helping families find their way and, changing dysfunctional situations into functional ones. And I'm very proud of that work and had many success with young people avoiding the prison system. And so then in the stage of life, with social work, there is this understanding of poverty and poverty related issues. It's woven into the work where most of the people, regardless of the geography, whether you're living in a farm in, Chaplin, Connecticut, or rather you're living in a housing project in Bridgeport, the theme is around poverty. And what I felt with all my work, that essentially, as an aside from the direct work, was a toleration of poverty, teaching families how to cope with poverty. And I was tired of that, and I wanted to shift that lens and shift that gear. So I shifted it over to advocacy. And so I began my career in kind of public policy. I first began as a community organizer, then became a lobbyist. And from that point, we were able to affect a lot of legislation in regards to, poverty-related issues and support for families in poverty, but also change the course and direction around mental health for young people specifically, and change and guide the system in a way that allows for more access for families to have with behavioral health and gaining access to children's behavioral health. So it was very rewarding work in that way. So as my work pivoted in that way, what I found, the underlying theme too, a lot of what we were doing was talking to politicians, getting them to change their mind, right, on a policy. And so I said, okay, what would it be like to be on the other side of this fence, right, and be the politician himself? And so I then campaigned and got involved in politics and became a councilman for the city of Hartford, which was rewarding work, but it was tough work because my first year, just 2 months in, we hit COVID. And I was the chair of Health and Human Services. So all eyes were on me. And it was a pretty daunting task. But what I'm proud to say, and the silver lining is, Hartford was a leader in many ways. And I helped to lead that ship in a lot of areas combating COVID. There was a period where Hartford had the lowest rates of COVID. And I'm very proud of that work that we did. And so now what I'm doing is my full-time gig is I'm a director of community schools. So we're creating change every day in the scholars and families that we serve. Sure. So, I have multiple memories of visiting folks in prison. I remember the biggest thing, the common theme about visiting everyone in prison was when you walk into visiting someone in prison, it's a reality. When those gates click behind you, you're in prison and you feel like you're in prison. And so, you're being watched by the COs or the correctional officers, and your behavior is managed by these same people that are managing the people that are actually in prison, the inmates. And so you feel like an inmate yourself, where you have to subject to the rules and you want to be able to leave that gates. And it's a very real thing that you feel, whether you're young or old. And I remember never misbehaving, even as a youngster when I would visit my dad. They were never in circumstances that lend itself to good emotional feelings. They were always felt penalized in a way, and the human element was always negated out of those experiences. I just remember one time where I visited my father and we were actually outside, like inside the prison fence, but outside sitting on a lawn table outside. And I don't even remember what we talked about. I just remember the experience was a unique one that I never felt before. Another one was for my uncle who passed away in the federal institution. And this was the only time I seen. They actually had vending machines in the visit. And so I remember the first time that I went and I didn't have any change because I didn't know. There was no one to let me know that you can buy snacks while you were visiting. And so I wish someone had said something somewhere. But I remember from that time on, I would bring $5, $10 worth of change, and my uncle would appreciate it at the time, and we would be able to get whatever we wanted from the vending machines. It was such a blessing to see him smile, eating a Kit Kat or a Snicker, things that he didn't have access to. And we would play chess, and we would be there for hours. And at some points in times, you forget, or you try to forget, where you actually are. And I miss my uncle very much. We lost him last year. Yes. I think the biggest thing I want folks to take away from my book is that it is real, that you could be anything that you want to be. I think in different communities and different unique circumstances, folks have different expectations placed on them. Some of them negative, like the one that I encountered for myself of this expectation of going to prison. But there could be other things that can be a cross to bear. But nonetheless, you can overcome those things and be whatever it is that you want to be, no matter the context that you were either born into or subjected to.